right, you're recording, so you can just start whenever.
Okay. Hello, my name is Mike James, and I'm with CivTech, working on the transit facility site selection for Bullhead City in coordination with ADOT. So one of the things that we wanted to do in our presentation today is give you a project introduction, talk about the 4 sites that we evaluated for the transit center, do a quick overview of what we heard at our public meetings, review our site evaluation, and talk about our next steps in completing the project. So back in 2018, CivTech was hired to mainly do 2 objectives for Bullhead City. The first is to identify a preferred site to accommodate development of maintenance and operation transit facility, as well as a transit center and intermodal facility for passengers. In addition to that work, we were hired to conduct any needed environmental clearance work to enable the city to pursue future assistance, federal assistance for construction dollars for the project. Next slide. And you can go to the next slide as well. So here's kind of the objectives. So going to the next slide, one of the things that we wanted to do is kind of show an example of what a transit facility could look like. On this slide, you can see we've taken some images of a similar facility that was done in Coolidge, Arizona. You can see the architecture of the building, the waiting room where there's an opportunity for passengers to wait, and an air-conditioned environment. They can buy passenger tickets. It's also a facility where staff can have office space and work close to their operation and maintenance facility on site. Next slide. So here you can see Bullhead City and the 4 sites that we evaluated. There's one out on Riviera to the west, 2 at the City Hall complex, and 1 out at the City Square in the former Kmart building. Next slide. So the first site that I want to talk about is the Riviera Recreation Center site. So this site was selected as it was currently owned by the city. So this area is really characterized by predominantly residential development. There is some neighborhood commercial in the area. The circulation and access is a little bit more challenging than the other 4 sites, and there's a fragmented sidewalk network. So if this was to be a location for a transit center facility, there would be quite a lot of infrastructure to build those sidewalks up to standards. Some of the other things that we looked at are the site conditions, the building, parking access. This is a little bit more constrained, smaller site than the others that we looked at. And it's approximately 1 mile from City Hall. One of the other things that we saw on this site is that it's relatively close to the Mojave Accelerated Learning Center, where there's a lot of trips back and forth to the school across the street that could impact transit operations. Next slide. So the next site is one of 2 sites here at the Government Municipal Complex, and this is the Train Road site, which is just immediately north of the City Hall building here. So these 2 sites are owned by the Bureau of Land Management and leased to the city. As you can see, the surrounding area is governmental uses, City Hall, there's a senior center, park, and a high school to the north. This site has really good access, as you have Train Road as well as Alanis and Hoppus Way connecting to the site. There are no known environmental issues. It's a vacant parcel, and it would have good proximity to City Hall. Next slide. Similarly, the Alanis Hoppus site is just northeast of the City Hall building, north of the ADOT Motor Vehicle Division building. This is a larger site, also vacant. It really has a lot of the same characteristics as the train road site, located with good access from buses coming from both directions, from the east and from the west, and from the south and north. As well as a vacant site, there's no known environmental issues. It does have, again, good proximity to City Hall and the other uses nearby. Next site. So the last site that we evaluated was the City Square site. So this was the site of the former Kmart building. It is a privately owned property. The surrounding uses are a retail shopping center, where you have the Hobby Lobby, some restaurant uses, there's a fitness center, so more of a retail environment. Circulation is off a interior road to the access. This was a former location where multimodal transfers happened, so we saw that in operation several months ago. As far as environmental, there's no known issues there. And being that this is a former retail buildings, there would be some work to retrofit that building for transit operations. And again, this is about a half mile from City Hall. Next slide. So back in November, at our last public outreach meeting, we had a handful of people who came and gave us some good input on the 4 sites. So some of the input that we heard is to make sure that our public meetings are scheduled at a time when they can be served by transit. I also took the opportunity that morning to go out and survey transit riders at the hub. What I heard there, talking to about 20 to 30 people, was that of all the people I talked to, they prefer either one of the governmental sites or the city center site. So they were not as enthusiastic or did not prefer the Riviera site. The other thing that we heard is really to show how that transit facility can be located on the site. And that's why we included some of those slides like you see here of what is the size of that facility, how could it fit on a corner of an intersection as it's shown. So these are just for illustrative purposes, but we know that the site, according to previous plans and looking at the number of vehicles, would work very well for both the current and future needs for the city. Next slide. So the other thing that we heard at the public meeting and we discussed quite a bit was, how can this project be funded? How does this clearance that we're working on allow the city to pursue federal dollars? We did have one resident that did prefer the Riviera site that we heard. That same person also mentioned that the City Square site would be costly as it's privately owned. We also heard that the size of the Lonas Hoppus is favorable because it would allow for both the existing transit operations to occur as well as growth of the system if that was to happen. So next slide. So one of the things that this project has is a technical advisory committee that's folks from the region as well as the city, consultant staff, ADOT staff. As a technical advisory committee, we review all the work. And one of the things that the committee did is develop site evaluation criteria to really look at and score each of these 4 sites on a number of criteria. So we developed 15 criteria that ranged everything from conformance with the general plan, land use designations, how well does these sites fit in with the existing neighborhoods, how well does it work for a transfer facility, how well is this going to be work to achieve the environmental clearances. Are there going to be difficulties with the site? Is there going to be structural changes needed to buildings? What does the utility access look like? How are people going to be able to access and walk to this site? as well as proximity to the administrative resources at City Hall, which are very much important to coordinating the operations that happen between transit and the greater city. So we looked at all these 15 criteria, scored the sites, and came up with a preferred location, which is the Alanis Hoppus site. So if you go to the next slide, you can see this is the preferred location outlined in yellow, just north of the motor vehicle department. So next slide. So the next thing that we're going to be working on is finalizing our report with the preferred alternative, so that we can finalize that report and then it can be submitted to the Federal Transit Administration, and which would allow the city to have the site cleared and seek federal grants in the future. So that's where we are with the project, and we look to finish up that work in February and March, and have that completed so the city can pursue future grant opportunities. Thank you.